Unfortunately, this presentation won't be on your jump drive just because I have actual data in it and it's not ready to be published yet. So sorry. I know. Sorry. Awesome. Yeah, take lots of notes. Also, this beginning of this is going to be super heavy on cattle, just because this project is very cattle focused. And there is companies that are using virtual fencing in sheep and reindeer and moose and stuff like that, and dairy. But for our purposes and for the projects that we have in Arizona, it is beef cattle focused. So that's what we're going to talk about right now. That's right. So first, I'd like to give a little bit of background on what Arizona's beef industry is, just because a lot of the folks I talk to are either just brand new into it and they don't realize how rich and how deep rooted this is. Or some folks are completely exhausted over how deep rooted it is. It goes either way. But really, cattle have been in Arizona for many and many years, right? So it actually goes back to, the Spanish conquistadors coming over, bringing cattle, and there used to be over 1 million head. And back then, we didn't have anything to keep them anywhere. So it was one of those, keep the cohort, push it here, push it here, push it here, but there was no fencing. Okay? That was until 1872, and this is when like the Homestead Act got passed, where we could actually have these land parcels. And one of the first ranches in Arizona was the Sierra Bonita Ranch, which is actually in Cochise County. And this is Jesse Davis, who is like the 6th generation great great grandson of Hooker, who was the original founder of this ranch. So again, long roots, deep, rich history. And so still kind of cool that they're still running cattle, still running Herefords for that matter, that were first established there. And then back then, the average herd size was about 40,000 head of cattle, quite extensive. Where you compare it to today's numbers, it looks a little different, right? We still have beef cattle. We don't have millions of beef cattle, but we have close to it. We do have about 7,000 farms and ranches that have cattle on them, and that is across Arizona. So it doesn't matter if you have one animal or 1,000 animals, okay? You're in that number. We do have some feedlots, in case anybody didn't know that. We do have feedlots in Arizona, so that's what the cattle on feed is. And I realize these look a little different because they're black and white, but we do feed out dairy cattle, so they're part of that number. But now, if we just look at, mama cows in terms of beef cows in our traditional cow-calf rancher, we have about 200,000 beef cows, so actual mama cows running around, with the average ranch herd size being about 100 head. Is that slightly impacted because of last year's drought? Absolutely. But that's about what we're looking at, okay? So what are the issues that we're facing, right? Well, every producer is facing this, whether you're running cattle or sheep or whatever, right? We're all facing drought. That's a big thing, right? It's going to get hotter, drier, and it's just inevitable. Okay? Labor is a big one. It's really hard to keep a day hand or even find a good one right now, especially with some of the day hand rates that go on, or maybe they're good for like 3 hours and then take off or whatever that is, right? So it is hard. And if you find a good one, normally people keep them forever and ever, and they end up, retiring as like the manager there. We do, of course, have to deal with rangeland conditions. So we talked a lot about overgrazing, talked about, having to do just pasture assessments and stuff like that. So that is something that we're facing as well. Urbanization is a big one. I know I have government agencies on here in a bad and good way. Depends on where you are in the state, what government agency you're working with, and if you get along with them or not. And then, of course, consumer misperceptions, which is probably the biggest thing. And I say misperceptions just because everybody can Google something, right? And so it's not so much of them having a complete just misunderstanding of what's going on, it's what they're actually seeing, right? So it's whatever they're perceiving as fact. That's why it's not a conception, it's not an original thought, it's just something that they were given, and because it was on the internet, it means it's true. Only I wish that was somewhat true. The bottom line is, when it comes to welfare, sustainability, and the driving force of a producer, especially if you do run cattle or any type of livestock, this is to be true, right? We know that we are very concerned about our natural resources. We know we are very concerned about animal welfare. We want the happiest, healthiest animals we possibly can have. We understand that there is going to be 8 billion people in this world that we have to feed. So we have to have some type of food security and be able to provide a meat product for them. On top of that is giving our story, right? We're going to lead that story. We're going to talk about the gate to plate story of how we raise our beef and how we are doing the best practices we possibly can to give you the best wholesome product you can. And then being efficient and innovative with the changing times. And this is where that virtual fencing comes in. So in case you didn't know, where I come into play with this, and this is really why I like my job, is because one, I like to talk about cows, and I really like to talk about cows. But two, in case you didn't know about extension, it's part of the land grant mission, which is the University of Arizona. And everything we do is to do basically be a bridge between the university and our stakeholders and vice versa. So if you have a problem, as I mentioned earlier, I have a problem. That's how my job works. One of those problems being this issue. So the average rancher, and this is based off a survey I released last year to a large portion of the stakeholders, is about 65 years of age. We have this crazy issue with inflation, right? We all know it. Prices go up, fuel goes up, the cost of everything goes up with the labor shortage, right? And when you look at Arizona, these are a lot of what the fences look like. Okay. Some folks do a really good job keeping up fence. But as we mentioned earlier, fence costs quite a bit of money per mile right now, right? Over about $14,000. And so is there a way that we can be innovative and be efficient in what we do while still maintaining that bottom line of producing a wholesome product? The answer is kind of. So here's this really hot topic called precision livestock management. Okay. You'll hear it as agriculture technology. You might hear it as livestock management. You might hear it as precision ag, whatever it is. The bottom line is it all pretty much means the same. Okay. So through precision livestock management, basically it's taking some type of technology and bringing it onto the farm or ranch. Okay. It has been around for a while. First started with in the 1970s with the domesticated dog. Okay. So who here has ever heard of or seen the e-collar on a dog, and you put out like a little stake or something, or you dig a line and all of a sudden that dog's not going any further? Okay. So when this got released, the livestock market goes, oh, can we do that? So in the 80s, that's when it started. Okay. And so it started small. So it started with, well, can we even track them, right? So a lot of you might have seen these RFID tags or EID tags, this button, right? So we can do what we refer to as traceability, where we can wand it, scan it, and we can follow that animal basically from the time it touches the pasture all the way till it touches your plate. The dairy, the swine, and the poultry were much more rapid at this. Kind of makes sense, right? Because they can just open a door and walk in and there's the animals. So being on extensive rangelands, it's getting a little bit of time, but we're getting there. We do use that RFID tag, obviously, right? But in terms of these other sort of technologies, we're adapting. And so recently, and I do say recently, because obviously this started back in the 70s, it's only been the last 20 years or so where we've been able to apply this technology to the ranch, okay, or like into an extensive ranch. So in doing so, this is what this virtual fencing is. Okay, so this virtual fencing is exactly what it sounds like. It's a virtual fence. You don't see it. You basically use a computer software program, and I'll show you, where you can set GPS coordinates of where I want that fence. Okay. It can be something where it's like on Google Maps. If you were just going, like, you know how you can hit points everywhere? That's kind of how this program is. You just click where you want that point. And that's how you build your fence. You have to have internet. Yes, ma'am, you do. I know, I'm sorry. So for Arizona, we are working with a company called Vence. It's the only company right now in the United States. Vence is VENCE. And there is potential breakthrough coming across the pond, if you will. So I wouldn't be surprised by end of spring next year or summer, you're going to start hearing about more companies coming across from New Zealand and Australia and like the Netherlands, because they're kicking down the door real fast trying to get over here. So what we wanted to do was figure out, well, can this technology work? Can we use it? And so with our decreased labor, with our increased drought events, when we talked about invasive grass species, even having, more fire fuels on land, right? Is there a way that we can control how this animal grazes more efficiently? How can we keep it contained or force it to graze in an area? How can we better use this technology and pair it with our grazing livestock? So through this, it's kind of two ideas. So in the software, you see these black cows, okay? These cows are fitted with a collar. It looks just like a dog collar. Fits kind of like that too. These collars send a GPS signal of where they are, so I can follow them. Okay, just like how you would track your phone or anything like that. It's just a GPS pin. Okay. Then we have these programmed GPS boundaries. As you can see, this is the actual fence. Again, that's kind of when I was talking about where if you were in Google Maps and go hit all those different pins, kind of the same idea. We drew them. Okay. So how does this collar work? Okay, well, it's through this conditioning process, okay, through a reinforcement. And with reinforcements, you have positive and negative reinforcements, right? So positive reinforcement, I have an Australian Shepherd. His name is Wally. He's about 2 years old. He will do just dang near anything for a pepperoni. Let me tell you, he would sell his soul for one, right? That's a positive reinforcement. He wants that treat. Now, I can't just hang out on a ranch and offer Scooby snacks to cows all day. It's not going to work. I've tried. Okay. I can do enticements. I can do water. I can do maybe some supplement, but I can't go out there and just, train them every day to stay in one area, right? So we do have to use a little bit of a negative reinforcement, which we know based off cattle being a prey animal, that they do respond well to negative reinforcement, okay? Where they're going to follow two behaviors. They're going to avoid an area or they're going to try to escape from it, okay? So what happens? Well, they have this fancy dancy collar, okay? Talks to a GPS satellite. And in this collar, it's onboarded and programmed, okay? All of this is all done through GPS satellite and a cell network, okay? And it will tell that cow where that fence is, the virtual fence. You do have to have this gateway or base station, and this thing kind of looks like a metal deer stand. And it will talk to the collars, and it onboards any changes that happens in the fence, talk to that collar. The collar will talk to that station, talk to the satellite, and we'll go up into the cloud where we get all that data. Okay, so those pictures I showed you earlier with the cows, it's all going to a cloud, all going onto the computer. Now, I'm probably the worst millennial that some have seen, so I don't understand all of the computer side of it. But I do know that when I download my program, I know where my cows are, I know who's interacted with the fence and all that fun stuff. So, as I mentioned, they do have to receive some type of conditioning for this, right? We're changing their behavior somehow. So as this cow enters into a fence, so if you could imagine this black line right in the middle between auditory and electric, that's the fence, okay? As it's entering into this boundary, it's going to be beeping at it. It's a very loud, high-pitched noise. It's not pleasant, and it beeps. As it gets closer to that fence, it's more frequent, so it goes beep, 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 right? The second it gets too close, it's going to receive a electric stimulus. Okay, it's at a voltage much smaller or lower, if you will, than an electric fence, but it is an electric stimulus. Once the cow breaks through that boundary and has decided she does not want to play today, she's just gonna go because they're cows. It happens. It will turn off when it turns off. Okay, so it's not like it's over there shocking this cow or anything, right? We're not doing that because we do care about animal welfare. And once again, it is at a lower shock than like an electric fence. Okay. So all of this started back last May, which is weird to say because that's when I started. I literally got a phone call like the day I started this job, and they were like, "Hey, we're going to the ranch on Friday. You want to come?" And I was like, "Sure." Like, guess what? You also get this research project. And I was like, even better. So this is happening at an experiment station down south. So being part of the land grant, we have experiment stations that are designated for us to do research for our stakeholders or make it, more applicable. Okay. This is called the Santa Rita, and there's about 52,000 acres. And basically, the overarching thought or objective of this is, does the dang thing work? Right? We want to know, does it work? If it won't, it's go. So we do work with the McGibbons. They own the cattle. Okay. We own the property, but they own the cattle. And we basically have two herds that we manage. We have a small herd and we have a large herd. Basically, one's a registered herd, the other one's a commercial herd. What we did was, through this app or this software, it's called Herd Manager, we plotted where these fences were going to be, these virtual fences. Just so happens that they have a lot of internal fencing, so we just put it right over wherever internal fence line was. Okay. Then in terms of collaring cows, it took a whole 5 days to collar the entire herd. And it wasn't just back to back, because as you know, if cows have calves on their side, it's a pain in the butt to separate everything and then collar and then repair and do all this stuff. So it was basically from April of this year until, well, we have to recollar next week, but that's about how long it's taking us to collar all these cows. So it is pretty extensive. I don't know. Oh, there it goes. So this is a video of us doing it. So it is kind of a chain collar. And it does have break points on it where the actual devices that stores that software, and it kind of hangs, it's a weight, right? So it'll hang underneath her chin, or at least in her neck. And we literally, I don't know if you guys can tell or what this is, but they're construction zip ties. So if that thing needs to come off her body, it's coming off her body, right? Again, animal welfare is my number one concern, and I want to make sure that we're not hurting these animals in any way, shape, or form with a collar. Okay. So what's the real application of this? Well, the biggest one is obviously being able to see your cows, but two is trying to get them off range. Okay, so I mentioned how labor is a big issue, right? And so doing a thing called passive capture, we were trying to figure out if you could actually gather a pasture of cattle. And what we did was we basically made these lines and shortened up their area. So if they had 100 acres to work with at first, we started moving them in to where like the center or the water was, and cut them off by like 20 acres over a period of time. Okay. This again, it's how you would gather on horseback and kind of sweep your pasture. We basically did that with this fence and then just moved it. We did this July with our small herd, thinking, we'll see if we can get at least a small herd to follow. And it did take 3 days of this to actually get them to, one, get used to the collar, and understand, when it beeps, don't walk any further. So what does that look like? Well, as you can see, this blue line, this is basically, think of it moving them from pasture A to pasture B, or pasture 1 to pasture 2. So you can see that when we started that training on day 1, so they're learning what those fences are. As we started pushing them, you could start to see this shift of, okay, the cows started moving on day 4. They were getting it. They could hear the collars. They understood what was going on, right? So this is where you start to see that big kind of shift of, okay, cattle movement. Is this solely because of the virtual fence? Meh. Is it sometimes, well, everyone's moving this way, so I got to go? Sure. We don't know yet. That's why this is very preliminary data. Because when we did it the second time, so again, moving, this is now from like pasture 2 to pasture 3, you see that they move a lot faster, right? And you can see by day 3 to 5, they're all moved over. So could this be because of the virtual fencing? Man, I hope so. So, I mean, we've spent the money and the time to do this. I hope it's the virtual fencing, but there are still a lot of questions to answer. Okay. But as you can see, we did get kind of a result. And then I don't know if you guys noticed on 5, 6, and 7, we have some stragglers, like a 1 and 2 cow that didn't want to go. We call them non-compliant. And there's just some cows, they just don't want to do anything. My suspicion is they're probably like a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old, because as we all know, those are going to be your headache children. And those are the girls that just do not care. These cattle are pretty docile, so I don't think it's like a one that has a wild hair or anything like that, because they do get worked about every 15 days. So speaking of rotational grazing, that's how they do it. So basically the overall application on this is some benefit, right? So basically, in terms of a conservation kind of perspective, it's keeping them out of kind of these high sensitivity areas or like riparian areas where there's gonna be a lot of moisture, getting those ice cream plants where they're gonna want to hit it a lot at, right? So giving those areas some areas to kind of halt or rest. Um, Looking at grazing intensities and kind of that spatial distribution. So again, seeing how efficient they are at utilizing this entire pasture, right? Maybe we're able to like force them into different areas. If they're not grazing up in the corner, well, why not? What's over there? What's going on, right? Sensory cue timing. So as I mentioned with the beeping, we're seeing if we can minimize any type of shock factor, and just see if we like lengthen that kind of that beeping noise if they'll listen. And then also that lead cow influence. And so that's why I said, I'm hoping it's virtual fencing that's helping with this, but also understanding, if anyone's gathered a large pasture, the second you go out there, those cows will see you, the older ones or the ones that know what's up. We're going to start headed toward the corral or head to the gate or head to wherever. So seeing if we only need to collar lead cows and that will influence everybody. So not everybody needs a collar. We are doing a pretty extensive cost benefit analysis, which is, well, again, math. It's there. But from this project, we are doing a second site now. So I'm working with a gentleman over in Gila Bend, and he has a femoral allotment. And in case you're not familiar, femorals are a little tricky just because it's kind of a very high sensitive area in the sense of, doesn't get a lot of moisture, doesn't have a great percentage of native grass species. So most of the time, if someone has a femoral, they're not grazing on it a lot. This one in particular hasn't been grazed on in 30 years. And so we're trying to see if there's a way that we can use virtual fencing to still utilize the area, maybe do a little bit of a conservation effort of seeing if we can bring anything back. And we're doing that with the BLM range con over there as well. So we got the okay. That should start in January. We're looking at animal welfare because obviously if you're shocking an animal, people are like, what's happening? Oh my gosh. Again, the shock or the electrical stimulus is lower or less than a electric fence. Okay. Yes. So we have done this thing of we did maybe strap some collars to some of the research specialists and we're like, whoa, and they did. And it was not bad. The first one's bad because you're just like, what the heck? But it's really not. I don't know. So this might just be an age thing. So in school, did anybody ever have like those, crank pens or whatever where you press the top of it and it like hits? Okay. That's what it feels like. Okay. So it's nothing crazy. But also seeing, what does that do to cortisol levels? Is that what's happening? So far, we haven't seen any issue with them being able to gain body weight, no issues in milk, no issues in them mothering up, nothing like that. So knock on wood. We do want to look at energy expenditure again. We keep talking about efficiency. We got to be more sustainable. So saying if there's a way to use this virtual fencing of like identifying really efficient cows, just in the way they're grazing, or maybe their movement patterns, whatever it might be. And then again, if fence is costing $14,000 a mile, if this can actually replace traditional fencing. So that first project or the second site I was talking about in terms of at Gila Bend, there is no fencing. So it's going to be a true, like a tried and true, say a prayer and go, and hopefully they stay in their designated areas. We'll see. It's going to be a rodeo, but it'll be fun. And then also saying, can we do like fence line weaning? Because no one's ever put these on a calf before. Can we put it on like a 5-weight? I don't know. We're gonna try. So overall, just the general scope of this, it should, in theory, decrease your labor needs because you don't need a whole bunch of people now gathering cattle, hopefully, or trying to move fences or fix fences or anything like that. You can definitely increase your grazing management. Again, it's pretty hands-on with the software, so you can, make it as intensive to move cows or whatever as you want. Potentially do reduce some fire fuel loads. So we did go take a bunch of production samples and trying to figure out like, okay, if we leave them out on this one area, and as I mentioned earlier, like why are they not in that corner, but like forcing them into that corner to kind of reduce what's going on over there. So seeing that happens. Agency adaptation, we are working very closely with the BLM and the U.S. Forest Service currently and trying to figure out how do we make this a thing? What's going on? And then grazing animal adaptation. So using, we talk about how, again, I started this whole entire talk of we've had cattle here for millions of, well, not millions of years, excuse me, hundreds of years. And, seeing, okay, well, we got them to this point, but can we make it better? What can we do to make it better? And so, as I said, it's kind of a quick and dirty of virtual fencing. I will tell you right now, I get lots of phone calls of, I heard about this virtual fencing thing, I want to do it. And I said, that's great. What do you mean you want to do it? What are you working with? And a lot of the times we do have to have the hard conversations of, well, I hear it's going to keep the cows in. That's kind of true. We're having an 80% success rate right now where we can keep 80% of the cows in. We're able to do this right now because we're on an experiment station. The BLM and the US Forest Service has 0 MOU or protocol right now for this. And so just being a permittee, it's not something that you can just go and do. And so we are working towards that. That is the end goal. There is a lot of, and I know this sounds awful, like I should be like, yes, this is amazing, but I'm a realist and I want you to know, I need you to know. Is virtual fencing really great right now? It's a hot topic and it sounds fun. The amount of collars we lose, the amount of times we have to go recollar, the battery life right now, we're averaging 4 months. The company says it should be about a year to 18 months. No, ours is 4 months. So, realistically, is it there right now? No. Would it be there 6 months from now? Maybe. I mean, they literally, every time we get new collars, we're changing the design or we're changing a battery, and like they're doing I mean, as I'm speaking right now, something's probably already changed. So it is becoming a very up and coming fast thing. So it might be there next year. It might need 5 years. But that's the reality, just so you guys know. But other than that, it's been fun.
We do have a question online, and I just
Yeah.
say also, we're kind of short on time. We're heading into our other speaker, Simon.
Yeah.
What is that? I don't know anyone is like it's been long, so well, if I would like to actually bring you in on this conversation and on this. It's actually kind of philosophically interesting.
Okay.
Not it. Battery lasts in the collar.
So on average, about 4 months right now with our collars. Other universities, so there's 7 universities / states involved right now, but they're also like in the Midwest and they have different landscape. They can go like I think the longest they have is 9 months, but for us it's been 4.
Okay, and so then the other question is, okay, so just one more. Do the collars perform any monitoring functions such as taking the cow's temperature to see if it's healthy?
Not right now, no, but they are, as I said, design is changing. We just had a call with them about if we wanted to take these measurements, what do we do? So I'm sure in the next 6 months, probably. But this collar right now, no.
Okay, so the question was, is there a government program to retrain displaced cowboys because of this? And Bruce is going to talk about GPS tags and things like that. I want to go ahead and qualify that with the understanding that personally, in my view, you would never have displaced cowboys because animal welfare and checks will still be a requirement on technology.
Correct.
But I'm curious to hear about what you guys do with, because you're the technology and others with you are using the new technology. Is there something that you would see the need to retrain, or there's displacement of your labor force?
So I wouldn't say there's a displacement entirely because like the collars right now, they're really awesome. I know it's a virtual fencing thing, right? But they're really awesome because you do have a GPS coordinate of where the heck that cow is, right? So it's really awesome to go send out a day hand to be like, hey, here's the map. She should be somewhere over there. And 9 times out of 10, they're gonna 7 out of 10, 10 times they're gonna find her there, right? I would say in terms of retraining, I mean, no, because it's still, I mean, you're still ranching, right? Like you still have to go check waters. You still have to go make sure, sometimes again, these batteries die. So you got to go figure out, okay, well, is it the cow that's dead or is it the battery that's dead? Right. So I don't see an issue with that. I do see though, like, I don't know, it might just because of I don't so I do see this issue of like, generational thing, right? Like I literally just spoke to 300 students at the University of Arizona in animal science and asked who had a ranching background. And I think maybe out of the 300, 10 of them raised their hand. And so there is starting to be this disassociation of what's happening. And so I don't know if it's the future, but maybe help with some of those labor shortages, but I wouldn't say completely get rid of a cowboy. Like you still need some hands. And again, if the system goes down, you still got to go gather and whatnot. Yeah, I'm sure you probably have
I actually agree.